Right, good morning. Tony Ryan here. This is our Ignite panel this morning, and the topic being key indicators to track business performances. I'll let each of our panelists introduce themselves briefly, but I'm executive chair of a company, Trilogy Hotels, which is a third-party operator of essentially investment-grade accommodation hotels that include both F&B and the full range of services. Maybe Tim, over to you.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm the founder of VenueLog. It's a new startup that's coming up to automate and facilitate technology and streamline operations. I come from a long background in hospitality. So I got about 15 years of experience, from front of house to bartending, to running kitchens, to operations, to running venues, opening venues, and consulting. And then ventured into the startup scene for the last 5-6 years now, and learned the ropes there, from development, integrations, customer success, product management, and then combining the two industries to hopefully help and facilitate and automate the processes and perform some analytics.
Great, thanks, Tim. Egor?
Egor, so National Hospitality Operations Manager for Asahi Beverages, currently looking after our own operated footprint, so 15 venues across the country, within 7 brands. Bit of a history within hospitality. So started my journey back of a house as a chef, and then progressed into operations management in more of a group scenario, so small, medium enterprise, and then moving into Asahi a year and a half ago.
Right, which is a very big enterprise.
It is certainly a large enterprise.
Great. Angeline?
Oh, thanks, Tony. Great to be here. Good morning, everybody. I'm Angeline Achariya, and I guess probably I'll keep this short. My claim to fame is 25 years in large food, agri-food and businesses globally. I did spend a fair bit of time in the quick service channel as well as the Chief Innovation Officer at Brian KFC across Asia Pac at one stage. So certainly very, very familiar with the challenges back of house, front of house, and through the drive-through. And I guess probably the thing that I'm most excited about is the opportunity around food, and how do I actually help companies to really grow profitably in a sustainable way. That's my sweet spot, if you will.
Terrific. Thanks, Angeline. Isaac, can you give us a heads up?
Yeah, nice to meet you all. So Isaac Lowrie, General Manager of the venue sales team at Ordermentum. Ordermentum's Australia's leading venue application. We're used by about 40,000 venues across Australia each month, which is about half. And our aim is really to help venues streamline their procurement and inventory management, increase profitability, and improve their cash flow and accounting. And I've been at Ordermentum for about 3 years. I've been in the food and beverage industry, like in a professional sense, for probably 15 years. I was at Treasury Wine Estates. I was then at Charlton United Breweries. I was at Asahi, although I didn't overlap with Egor, unfortunately, although we do have a couple of people that we know in common. And I did work at, cafes, restaurants, cinemas, and all the rest of it back as a teenager and at university. So I've been in the hospitality industry for most of my life.
Great. Thanks, Isaac. Leon?
Hey everyone, I'm Leon. I'm the CEO of the Mulberry Group. Similarly to everyone else here, been in hospitality for what I reckon would be my whole life, really. Even growing up, my dad was a chef, so always been, quite heavily exposed to the environment. Within hospitality, I'd say, business and hospitality are two really big passions for me. So I feel really grateful that I've been able to find a place where they intersect. And I reckon despite what some of my high school teachers might tell you, I'm actually really interested in the numbers that govern those two things. And yeah, it's quite, I'm kind of, I think for the purpose of this chat, I kind of spend most of my time. So, I've been a small business owner since I was 22, had cafes, restaurants, bars, all the rest of it, started a beer company. And I'm definitely down the startup, smaller end of the scale. Like I feel as though if Egor saw some of the dashboards we use on a weekly basis, he'd probably laugh his head off. But I do think, though, that despite where you're at on your journey, In order to understand the sophisticated stuff, you need to understand the rudimentary stuff as well. So perhaps I can offer a bit of value there.
Great, Ben. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Ben Charlton. I work for a company called MEWS, which is a property management system in the hotel space and around the hotel space, I guess. Started my career working in the Marble Bar at Sydney Hilton, making cocktails. So been in food and beverage for a long time, moved overseas, worked with airlines, hotels, online travel agents, and now in hotel tech. So come at this I guess in a little bit of a different angle. We at MEWS are really looking for the opportunity to build out a great guest experience from food and beverage through to the hotel experience as well. So we'll come at it from that angle and talk about some of the things we're seeing in that space today.
Great, thanks very much, Ben. Well, I think the first thing we should do for people listening and watching is that hospitality is clearly a very dangerous affliction, because everybody who started in hospitality is still in it. And I think for me, it was pulling a beer at a pub in Mascot at age 17, which was probably illegal, but it's been a long career as well. So it's a hell of a fascinating industry, hospitality, when it gets its hands on you. Okay, if we just get on to our topic of key indicators, maybe Egor, I'll just open with you. What are the sort of you've had a rich experience, sure, with Asahi, but from a range of other businesses with Riverland Group. What are the sort of the three KPIs that you look at when you're looking at the performance of your current business and previous businesses?
Look, I think KPIs are quite interesting, right? People tend to go to the monetary value of KPIs and just look into what do your accountants provide you. But I think one of the most important things in hospitality, and you should set yourself as a KPI, is probably your customer experience and how you deliver that. I think a lot of people forget about that, but being in hospitality and having that as our main goal to deliver great experiences, I think is probably the first thing you should make sure you measure and set yourself goals or objectives around. I think we all go through the same challenges these days in terms of labour. So staff turnover is probably the second most important KPI for me when we analyse our businesses, be that SMB or SME, it doesn't really matter. But if you're able to deliver great experience and retain your staff, that probably should be your most important key performance indicators. And I think the other one is sustainable growth. Before we even tap into things like margin or labour percentages or indirects or EBITDAs, which obviously are non-negotiables as KPIs, but is your business growing sustainably? Are you growing above inflation? How are you tracking? So I think that's quite important. So customer experience, turnover.
Turnover and business growth. And business growth is both outlet growth and individual profit growth, revenue growth. All of that. Yeah. Okay, maybe that's a good place to start in terms of customer experience. I mean, maybe Leon, I mean, you've got a fascinating group of how many outlets, or how many venues do you have? 6 or 7?
9 we've got, plus a farm and a coffee roastery.
Right. Okay. All based in Melbourne, huh?
Yeah.
And they range in size from sort of quite small up to very significant F&B outlets, right?
Yep. Cafes, coffee shops, restaurants, the full spectrum.
Okay. Other than smiling faces, how do you measure your customer experience?
So happy to go into that. I think it's important though to just look at it from a financial perspective first, because the reason I say that is because I think in the echelon we kind of play in, I think everybody who is in that real, quality driven, positive impact kind of aspect of hospitality, there's a very intrinsic gravitation towards customer experience. Yeah. It's so there, that often I've got to actually try to fight against it a little bit and ground it in some numbers. Okay. And so I think the first question that's really important to tackle philosophically is, what are you actually doing as an organization to increase the financial literacy of all the managers in the organization? And again, in my space, that's really, really important because no one came to work at the Mulberry Group to become good accountants, except for the actual accountants. Everyone else came here because at some point we all made a decision to dedicate our lives to a craft that involves being in the service of others. And so I think it's really important to understand how the numbers can support you to do that thing that you love. And I just think the quick snapshot I'll give you within that is, I think the first question you've got to start with when you're looking at the numbers is, are you looking at it from a day-to-day, week-to-week perspective, or are you looking at it from a horizon perspective? So, you know, using financial accounting terms, it's like, are you looking at the P&L or are you looking at the balance sheet? You know, it's just when you start to throw around terms like that and you're trying to increase the financial literacy of the company, it's about where the eyes start glazing over. And I think you have to kind of look at it and just say, look, week to week, right? There's a lot of the P&L stuff around just your very rudimentary kind of numbers around, like, are you hitting the forecasted revenue that you want, your net profit, your COGS, all the rest of it.
Okay, well, let's come back to how we measure customer experience a bit later on, and think some others might have some view. But seeing we're getting into numbers straight away, let's dive into it. Okay, Leon, what's your key financial metric then?
Okay, so I just think, given the climate that we're in right now, before you get too bogged down in the week-to-week stuff, I think you have to actually zoom out a little bit and just look at your balance sheet. And the two things that I think are absolutely critical right now is starting with what I would call your debt to equity ratio. And then the second thing that's really important after that is looking at your debt to EBITDA ratio. And that has to be sequential. So why I say that is because right now there's a lot of organizations in hospitality that have never really analyzed this before. And many of them are probably carrying debt to some capacity. And those debts could either be leveraged or they could be a massive burden. You know, and I think if you're carrying a bit of unhealthy debt at the moment, that is probably going to be your biggest killer as the market gets more and more saturated and more difficult to operate in. So a quick analysis over that is I think, you know, mission critical, really.
Right. Let's talk about a debt to EBITDA ratio that might make sense. Let's just say I've borrowed $1 million to set up my F&B business.
It's 2.0. I mean, that's your sweet spot every day.
And so what's the number that you're looking for from a debt to EBITDA ratio?
So if you borrowed $1 million, then you need to put 500,000 in the bank of EBITDA, and you need to do that within that I would say first 12 months of
really, you're saying I've got to earn $500,000 of EBITDA to cover the $1 million in debt.
Yeah, to justify it. Yeah, I mean, we'll put it this way: you don't have to, but if you do that, you're going to look pretty bloody good to credit.
But often my debt servicing on that $1 million might only be 100,000, assuming I've got a 10%.
Yeah, I mean, it to me, it's kind of, I just look at it blanket, because within that, how you structure things is it's a separate dimension, I think, and that's when you start to get back into the P&L, because it's kind of weird. It's like that interest is in the middle, you know, but it's kind of like, it's not quite EBITDA, but it should be considered there, because even though it comes after net operating profit, it's those levers that are going to impact your ability to service the debt.
I think as you scan the newspapers and look at the amount of receiverships and administrations in the hospitality industry, clearly that's a debt problem, because the lenders
but I think I just want to really stress, though, before you get to debt to EBITDA, you first have to start with debt to equity, because if that's not sound, then you really got to be careful going down the debt to EBITDA road. You might not have a foundation to build off.
Okay. Question is how we get that debt, but maybe that's another one. Let's move on to the P&L side of the equation. Maybe, and please anybody pop in, but let's just, on the P&L side, we've got a labor cost, which let's just say that's significant. One of the measures is revenue as a percentage of employee hour. Okay, so let's assume your average cost of an employee at the moment with on cost is, can someone give me a number? $40 an hour, $35 an hour with on cost. That right? Oh, sorry, we've got you're on silence there, Egor.
Over 40 for sure, yeah.
Over 40, okay. So if I want to make sense in terms of a metric, what do I need to get if I've got a coffee shop or a bar what's my revenue that I've got to get per employee hour? If it's costing me 40, what do I need? 120, 130, something like that? Yep. Tim, does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah, generally you want to sit above the 100 mark.
Yeah.
Plus anything after that, your team's just not efficient. And that's what that metric really is for. So the more hours you spend, the lower that number gets. So I would say, yeah, about the 110 to 120 is a measure of efficiencies, and that needs to be scattered out throughout the day and how you measure it.
Okay. And I'm measuring that on a weekly basis or a monthly basis?
You can do it on a monthly, weekly, daily.
Right.
Okay,
Ben, you've got MEWS is the company you work for is a property management system used for hotels, but you do have a point of sale offering for restaurants. Are you able to calculate this revenue per labor hour?
Yeah, we look at it. We look at it, I guess, more holistically at a hotel level,
Right.
rather than individual outlets. Like we do have the information that flows down to measure the success at the individual outlet level. But for us, we have sort of 5 metrics that we use for as key performance indicators. Some of which have already been touched on. So, you know, guest experience. There's a few tools that measure that. You have guest lifetime value, which is another one, and then revenue per employee and time on task are some of the ones that we're using. That I guess from a hotel's point of view, I don't think that's really been touched, and in the traditional sense. So we're trying to change the way that people think about this. I mean, even just sitting on this call for me is been educational. Some of the stuff that Leon's talking about, I think, is questions that need to be asked of hotel operators as much as F&B operators. So.
Right. Okay. Maybe time on task is an interesting one. One of the measures for coming out of the kitchen, and we've got a chef here in Egor and plenty of experience on the group. Someone tossed out that maybe it's in the kitchen, we should be doing 5 covers per man hour out of the kitchen or person hour out of the kitchen. Isaac, you've been in that situation where you've had to. Is that realistic?
If you can't handle the heat, get out of the kitchen, I think was probably the lesson for me early on. So I'll defer to Egor and Egor on that one. But one thing I would say is, I was talking to a venue the other day, a venue owner, cafe owner, and said, how can we help? You know, open book, tell us what we can do. And he said, can you decrease the cost of gas and electricity? Can you lower my rent? Can you change the award rate? And I said, well, no, obviously we can't help with any of that. And I think that highlights when you're looking at the P&L, there's obviously the revenue bit, but as you're looking at your direct costs and your fixed costs, there are some you can control and there are some you can't. And I think we're seeing the best operators are really honing in on what are the ones they can control and the ones they can't. And things like COGS, you can renegotiate with your suppliers, you can shop around, and obviously that's part of what we can help venues do. And on the fixed cost component, you can't change the hourly wage of the employee, but you can to the point of time on task. Look at how do you streamline, and obviously there are a few people on this panel that will see digitization as part of that. You know, looking at how can you streamline operations, because it might save you an hour of time that the casual chef spends putting the orders in, or the barista spends putting the orders in.
Okay, we'll come back to cost of goods sold, because that's clearly your area of expertise. I just want to see if I can nail this 5 covers per man hour. Egor, does that come out of your kitchen?
Tony, I didn't use that particular metric, but I am a great fan of the productivity metric that you touched on before, the output per hour. I think it's a good metric because you can it's easy to measure, right? So sometimes people get bogged into labor percentages, right? But the productivity you can measure every day. End of the shift, your managers or your head chef should actually be able to pull that figure out based on time and attendance and your point of sale.
Okay, so you take your time and attendance software, which is Employment Hero or whatever, marry it with your point of sale, and then you're able to look at the amount of covers per work hour or revenue.
Just based on your revenue. It's an easy metric and should be digestible.
Okay. So we'll come back to labour again, but Isaac, seeing you're on it, let's talk about cost of goods sold, food costs, right? So now, Isaac, you're essentially a digital marketplace between suppliers and
Venues, yeah.
There's, yeah. Okay. So if I sign up with you, am I helping me lower my cost of goods sold by using your system? And if so, what's the percentage?
Well, I think there are a couple of pieces, right? The first bit is knowing what you are actually spending with your current suppliers. At the moment, you go into the average venue and there are piles of invoices. They're scattered across, various surfaces in the kitchen. Some of it's put into a spreadsheet manually, some of the time. And in that context, with high staff turnover, I know that, as Egor said, we try and minimise that, but with high turnover, it's hard to be across what you're actually paying now. Right. Not to mention what payment terms there are, what have happened with the credit you got, and so on. So I think digitising can help just create that visibility. You go in and you see, in Ordermentum, but again, there'll be other ways you can do it. But in Ordermentum, you go and you see, here are my orders. Here's how much I paid. Here are the invoices. Here's the amounts I paid out of my bank account. And that's know it to begin with. Be able to share that data across different employees and as they change over time. And then there's the second question of how do I optimize? And that's what we do have a marketplace. Like we're trying to help not just venues trade with their existing suppliers, we do have that, but also if they need to find a new supplier, because they hear if it's a cafe and they say, I see that protein balls are popular, I see that cold pressed juice is popular, that could be a way I increase my revenue by having something new that people want. They can find it, discover, connect and trade seamlessly rather than having to get onto Google and spend 5 hours trying to find the suppliers before even seeing the products.
How do you qualify your suppliers? I mean, aren't we at risk that, are people really delivering on the promise?
Yeah, that's right. So we've got a we do curate our offering. We also tailor and personalise what venues can see. Again, this comes back to respecting venues' time and the operators' time. They're all busy. They don't want to spend time connecting with people and or searching on Google to try and find the name. So they email the person so they then get the product list a week later. They want it all at their fingertips. And then we've got a team that works with the supplier side of our business to make sure they're providing great experiences for those venues. Right. We want them to.
Angeline, that's really your part of the world, isn't it? In terms of the quality of those suppliers and the sustainability of their individual operations.
Oh, absolutely it is, Tony. And I think Isaac makes a really good point in terms of how do you curate. But, it's not just about the offering. I would say let's take a step back. And, one of the things I always observe with a lot of venues is they have this massive menu and therefore they're bringing a lot more complexity back of house as well as front of house, right? And when ultimately you're trying to get the best customer experience. So I think one of the big things is how do you offer something that's unique, that's differentiated, that brings in people because it's in your premises to experience. So for me, it's also making sure you go back to that space rather than actually increase a lot more complexity with bringing more suppliers on, more products. Ultimately, consumers, when you think about it, your customers like things that are familiar with a little bit of difference.
Right,
so how do you offer that to people in a way that then brings you repeat and also brings you loyalty, because ultimately you're competing with hundreds of cafes and restaurants and venues out there as well. So that would be probably the thing that I'd urge people to do.
Okay, reducing the ingredients or reducing menu. Well, let's talk about menu engineering then. Leon, how important is that? How often are you turning over your menu? How do you feeding back? What's the feedback loop for determining your menus? And how important is cost and sustainability?
Oh man, you're talking about a lot of stuff there. I reckon first thing I'd say is your menu and tweaking your menu needs to be constant and it needs to be frequent. I think like you mentioned something that I'll probably pick up is the feedback loop.
Yeah.
One of the things that we're blessed with in hospitality is we probably have one of the most immediate customer feedback loops out of any industry. Like if you are a car manufacturer, you got to release a car, you'll find out at probably 8 months, if you're lucky, whether you nailed your product market fit. In hospitality, you put a new dish on, you find out that night, and so I think not enough people leverage that. So I think the way that you have to really leverage that information is you got to do a lot of talking. You know, you got to talk. I mean, obviously we're going to review all of our data that comes through from like 7rooms and Google reviews and all the rest of it. But I think that's being a little bit passive if that's all you rely on. You need to be really active, and you need to survey. You need to run focus groups where you can. It's not uncommon to see our founder, you know, on the floor on a Saturday night, just coming up to a table and shouting him a glass of wine to ask him some questions, you know. And I think you have to take that stuff and then you have to feed it back into the operation and tweak accordingly, because if you just ask people what they want, right, like they sometimes don't know, you know, or they might just tell you that they want something that's quite aspirational and they're going to describe some utopian situation. But the reality is, if you ask them what they actually order and what were the last 10 dishes that they ordered on a Saturday night when they went out, you might find there's a bit of a discrepancy there. So I think like one of the things that's important to determine is like, once you can understand like this is what people are ordering, do you have those products on your menu? You know, and if you don't, then get one on and see what happens and measure it straight away and see if it's sold and benchmark.
That's really hands-on, right? So every night seeing what's selling. That's sort of back to that customer expectation. You mentioned, I mean, one feedback loop we call is Google and 7rooms, Open Table. Are people using the feedback from those players to determine how their success?
For us specifically?
Or you specifically, yeah.
We take everything we can get. Like, honestly, it doesn't matter what it is. If it comes from a customer and we can turn it into insight, we'll do it.
Right. Okay. So you get those, and plus you do surveys. Egor, how about you? What were you using to get your feedback loop from customers?
Definitely, there's a few aggregators there that will pull all the organic reviews for you.
Right.
Be that Facebook or your platform, or your ordering, your reservation platform, or Google reviews, or any other stuff that is out there. So there are aggregators that will pull that for you. We use an aggregator and use different in the past.
Right.
And also use mystery shoppers in the past. Okay. I don't use them, but I found that to be quite an insightful way if they're done consistently. And if you're able to curate the questions that you want them to go through, it's quite an objective way to present some feedback to your staff as well.
Right, great. Ben, Tony, I mean, sorry. Yes, Isaac, sorry.
One more comment on that. I think, and this is, I'm going to throw back to Leon, but I think, you know, a lot of these sources we're talking about, there's a lot of data there, right? Your Google reviews, your other sources. And I think that things like ChatGPT are making a big difference in how you can actually make sense of that. If you've got 2,000 rows of Google reviews, that's very hard to have one person sit through and go through and make sense of it. And I think, Leon, at the Ordermentum event a couple of months ago, you might have had a story about how you use ChatGPT to try and synthesize some data like that.
Yeah, we did. I mean, I'd kill to have 2,000 rows of feedback, just saying. But look, ultimately, we used it for a bit of a less mechanical and a more philosophical purpose. But we were trying to just do some auditing of the identities across our venues. And when you start to try to, you know, nail identity, you get pretty aspirational. And sometimes you just have to look at what's there and own it. And for one of our venues, we just took all the reviews that we had and just put it into one document and dumped it into ChatGPT and said, identify the most common themes, and it gave us the identity pretty quick.
Ben, that's great. I mean, in hotel world, obviously there's a lot more feedback opportunities than in F&B. You know, you've got a 500-room hotel, you get plenty of feedback. And so there are in hotel world, I mean, people like Trust Me and Revenate, which actually scrape data from all of those sources, plus also from LinkedIn and Instagram and a whole bunch of other stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about how those work?
Yeah, I think it's probably very similar to what the other members were talking about, where you're sort of collating data to give you an identity or understand a trend that you're seeing. I don't necessarily think that someone is tasked at a property in a hotel, and I would suggest this is the same in food and beverage, to take action from that. And I think that's really what we're talking a lot about. It's like, it's great to automate tasks and do all these things, because what that will do is it will free up your people to be able to spend time looking at these real customer requirements to increase your guest experience. So can you automate tasks to free up people to then really start looking at your guest experience to make it better so that it drives more revenue and ultimately repeat customers driving more revenue. And I think the tools are available, whether they're being utilized enough is probably the question that I would. Yeah.
So let's talk about those tools. We've discussed there the guest experience, but let's talk about the tools more generally. And probably Isaac and Tim, you're right on the cutting edge of that. Ben's saying it'll free up staff to do more important tasks in a hotel, guest relations, or something or other else. Tim, tell us about your startup in terms of what it's attempting to do in terms of freeing people up.
Yeah, so throughout the years in hospitality itself, you realize that there's a lot of grunt in generating data or consolidating across the fragmented systems that you're using. And that's across POS systems, labor systems, accounting systems, booking, reviews, food safety, you name it. That has to be reported at the end of the day, month, week, year, however. And so what we're working on is, and what we've achieved and rolling out is automating all those systems, getting them all connected, and then streamlining that process. So you have all of the information from all the systems right ready, so you can make informed decisions about your performance and what's going on within your venue. And that's broken down leveraging AI components. So you can essentially ask AI what's happening, what day, how it works, and the metrics that you want to understand. It'll just spit out for you based on all the data that you've consolidated over past. Sure. Generates insights where you can establish forecasts.
So you have it like, is there a central data? There's a whole lot of other systems that are legacy systems in our businesses, and Employment Hero and a whole bunch of other different things. Do you bring them together through APIs? Is that how it's all done? And then you create dashboards for Egor and Leon to be able to operate their businesses?
Yeah, that's right. So generally, in restaurants specifically, you would have someone sit down at the end of the night and consolidate all the information from all of your systems to put it into a report, which generally is then thrown into a spreadsheet, which is then taken out of the spreadsheet and then put into an email to send it off to the owners, vice versa. That stipulates the one day and the performance of that one day. But if you have the past of your lifetime from when you've started with these different systems, you have all the information that you can utilize to track your past performance, what's happened, and then you can also sort of then generate a forecast for the future based on what has happened and events.
Okay. Ben, your system, again, you're a hotel property management system for a hotel. You can, again, there's so many different energy systems operating within a large hotel. Can you have all that plug into your PMS?
Yeah, so I think from our point of view, the idea being an open API, you can plug in anything. We have 1,000 integrations already ready. So you come to us and tell us what you want, and we can help you build the stack that you're looking for. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is create the best guest experience that offers choice. That's ultimately what it comes down to, and then generating more revenue. So if there's a specific hotel door lock system that you operate, or a energy saving system, and it needs to integrate with PMS, that's available for you to do.
Okay. Tim mentioned the word forecasting. Now, if labour is our biggest single expense, and we'll come to try and put some numbers around that before we finish, but if labour is your biggest single expense, the question is, how many punters am I going to have at my restaurant next Thursday, assuming it's raining in Sydney? Now, how are people making that assessment? What tools are they using to try and get a handle around forecasting? Someone want to?
So currently, you would look at your past days of performance. Hopefully, you've recorded the weather.
Yeah.
Generally, people talk about weather in reports anyway, whether it's useful or not. But hopefully you've recorded that, and you've recorded your customer count or specific metrics around the people inside your venue. What we can provide is we automatically integrate with the weather, so you never have to report on it. And that means that you can break down weather trends and what happened and how many customers you had in based on that weather or events around you.
Right.
I can then stipulate they're done with it.
What happens if it's a Wednesday and I've got a State of Origin game on? Is that you just guess that make an assessment about that?
Tony,
Yeah, so you can either record it yourself if
Yeah.
you but we're working with another company to get all of that information directly. So when you have your forecast, you can compare it against those specific events in the city or near your specific location.
Isaac, you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you're honing in on a really interesting point, right? Which is hospitality is very hard, and every business, most business operators, it's just their venue. That's all they see. And, you know, some people like Leon and Egor are lucky to see across, you know, multiple venues, and they might be able to spot trends across that. But this is a key role where platforms like us need to play to help create a more sustainable industry, right? Use the data. We've got $4 billion worth of order history. You know, we know very well in Sydney and New South Wales how order patterns are going to shape in the lead up to school holidays or Easter or, you know, key events like the footy finals. And we're looking at how can we put that data to work. We've got a team of 4 or 5 machine learning engineers that we're looking at going, how can we provide venues with not just an easier way to order on your phone, on the browser or whatever, but also give them smart nudges that will say, hey, you're ordering the same amount you did last week, but this week everyone's going down the coast for the weekend. You might need to curve it down. And I think there's a lot we can do to help the industry.
Okay, Angeline, you've come from an academic background. You've looked at this, which is obviously a lot of looking forward to the future. What do you see in terms of the forecasting, maybe at a meta level rather than at a local level?
Oh yeah, I think I'll talk it from a customer consumer level probably rather than academic, right? So for me, I think one of the big things, if you think about is what's happening out there from a sustainability perspective, right? So if you look at waste, if you look at utilities, somebody mentioned before, the customer and the consumer is wanting to know the story of their food and their beverage, right? How did it come to be? Where did you source it from? You know, how does it actually, you know, enable it coming through? So I think from that space, there is certainly an opportunity for business to actually communicate that story that comes through. And I think at the end of the day, I mentioned how to use streamline and differentiate your menu. You can certainly do that. You can tell a powerful story, and hopefully you're able to charge a little bit more for that drink or that plate of food at the same time as well. So you're maximizing your margin at the end of the day, right? And I think that's going to be important because ultimately people come for what? There's really 3 things that I've seen in my career. It's around convenience, it's quality, and it's value. And value doesn't necessarily mean price. And in an inflationary environment as we're operating in right now, I think thinking of value and what else can you offer, including the price, is going to be important. And that's going to be down the customer experience and that sustainability story that you can tell.
Leon, you're right in the front line of that with your farm. And how important is that? Does your homegrown produce or company-grown produce flow through to your various outlets, and how do you market that at the outlets?
We don't do a good enough job of marketing it, I should say up front. I think we've spent, you know, 5 or 6 years trying to create these amazing stories, and therefore we haven't done an amazing job of sharing them, but we're now at a point of maturity where we can. So look out. But I think realistically, what I'd say in terms of the importance of it, I mean, our motivation, you know, for setting up the farm and operating the farm has never been for anything that is like just pure business mechanics.
Right.
It's purely values, you know, driven, and it's the sort of thing that, you know, we all are extremely passionate about, is driving positive change in the world. One of the byproducts of that, I would say, is some pretty handy business mechanics, right? So one of those is differentiation. You know, like I think in a saturated market, you have to stand out. And when it comes to differentiation, how clearly can you state your brand promise? You know, like what is your strategic competitive advantage? Because we're one of just a bunch of restaurant groups. You know, but as far as I know, I think we're the only one that actually owns our own farm. And within that, we're the only ones that donate 10% of net profit from every one of our venues to our farm. You know, now that is a very clear brand promise, because I can make, I think a good brand promise in business is one that you can make. It's easy to measure, and you never, ever under-deliver on it. Now,
Yeah.
I could make a promise to the whole of Australia and say, hey, if you come and dine with us, you can buy a coffee, you can buy a glass of wine, you can do the whole chef selection menu, right? Doesn't matter. You spend $1 with us and you are a part of Positive Impact. And I can never under-deliver on that promise because 10% of whatever you spend is going to go towards the farm.
Right. Okay. Are you promising things like, you know, Australia's best tomato? Are you doing stuff?
I wouldn't make a promise like that because I think it's just impossible to.
I'm still on the search for the world's best. Maybe Isaac, you can help me find.
I'm sure Egor's got some claims around Australia's best craft beer in some of the venues.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, let's ask him. Egor, what's Australia's best craft beer?
That's a very convoluted market to be putting my opinions on today.
Right. Okay. We're getting close. What I do think I want to do is just get some numbers for some of our business owners out there in terms of what are sort of the profitability numbers we should be expecting. If I look at so let's say utilities. What's utilities costing people at the moment? 10% of revenue? More? A bit less? Leon, do you got to give us a number on that?
I don't think I can, mate. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Okay. No problem.
Yeah,
okay.
It's hard. That's not from us not gathering the intel. It's just everything's so volatile right now.
Okay.
Yeah,
What's our
next
labor
week, it'll
cost?
be different.
What's our labor cost on just roughly across outlets?
As in, what do we target?
Yeah. What do you target?
Yeah. So at this current point in time, we're trying to get to 40%.
40%.
Like, just as an average across the board. That's different. In some venues, it's a little bit lower. In some venues, a little bit higher.
Smaller if you've got a small coffee outlet.
That's what we're going for right now.
Okay. So you're looking at about a 40%.
Can I just interrupt you? That stat actually was shared by John Hart yesterday at the session, and this was Australia-wide survey data that's very recent, and labour costs are now 47% costs, which is the highest they've ever been in an environment with highest turnover. So it's always been around that kind of 30%, and it's now averaging 47%. Just
okay.
sharing that data with you.
And maybe Dominic, maybe you can handle or the panel. What's our staff turnover rate roughly that people are experiencing?
Unfortunately, in the 40s as well.
In the 40s as well. Yeah. Okay.
That is the and it would appear that a lot of these metrics have been seriously altered, if you like, since COVID. So there's a kind of a resetting happening. And I think why perhaps the volatility in the markets there is because it hasn't settled yet. And too many expense classifications are just weighing in the breeze.
Hey, Tony, can I point out as well, I think outside of the work I do with the Mulberry Group, like in terms of just the consulting that I do, like I'm very loath to give people a blueprint set of numbers because I think that it's quite arbitrary. I think it really depends on the business and what you're trying to achieve, because some organizations that are completely mission driven, they are probably going to sacrifice a little bit of their margin for that. But it's a classic thing. Do you want, like I've seen people target 15% net profit. I've seen people that are happy with 10. Would you settle for 8% of a business that's doing 180 grand a week and 80 grand more than 100? Like at the end of the day, it's all relative. And I think you have to start, with that initial point of strategy to figure out what are you actually trying to achieve. It's from that.
Yeah. I think the important thing is you got to make a profit. Otherwise it's not an interest. But I take your point. You can adjust. You can achieve profit margins by taking short-term actions that may not ultimately be in the interest of the business or the ultimate purpose. With though taking that warning from Leon, maybe Isaac, I just to build it up, what's your cost of goods roughly as a percentage of revenue?
I think you see venues between 30 and 40%. I think it depends a bit on, maybe a bit higher in alcohol-led venues. The guys here would have a strong view, but back to that point before, right? You hear that story about wages. And you
Yeah.
look at where can you actually check your costs?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's COGS, and the other thing I should say, like obviously we work with a bunch of venues, heaps of venues, but we also work with a heap of suppliers, and it's not there is pain being felt on that side of the network as well, and we think that it's that tricky balance. We're trying to help venues and suppliers walk that tightrope where the venue can buy at a price that they can then, you know, make wonderful dishes and sell it at a good margin, but the supplier will stay in business, because if you squeeze too hard on that side, then suddenly you don't have anyone to supply, and you've only got a few very big monopolists or duopolists left. And
I think taking Leon's point, it's really important. There's a sympathetic person in the middle of that digital marketplace, because it can be pretty dangerous. Dominique, I think we're that's it for time.
Look, it's been a fantastic conversation, and I just wanted to share in all of the work that we did leading up to this amazing program commencement yesterday. We surveyed everyone who has registered and canvassed businesses right across the kind of greater hospitality industry. And we say that because people tend to think of it as just F&B, but it's the entire kind of supply chain. And there were 4 key tracks that emerged, or what we've identified as tracks that emerged as the things that are seriously keeping people awake at night. And it didn't matter what business they were in. Number 1 was workforce by a million miles, you know, finding talent, retaining it, attracting it, cost of wages, upskilling, cost of management, etc., or even having a talent pool to advance into management. So workforce. Second was finance and ops, and I say second because a lot of what the issues in workforce were actually financial in nature. But finance and ops, this hunger for greater sort of financial acumen, that's something that has really come through very strongly. And the use and adoption of technology. There's a very unskilled sector, as a gross generalisation out there, hungry for tech, but just not quite sure or not confident about how to use it, where and how to apply it. I've been very interested and curiously taking notes during this conversation with all the apps and things that are being referred to. So that's a big piece. The customer was the third. Who is this customer? And the customer at every stage in the supply chain. Everyone's got potentially a different customer, and the kind of the changing nature of their needs and demands, which then kind of flow back to impacting what it is that you're selling them. And then a category that we've identified as sustainability. But it's not just about, it's sustainability in every sense of the definition of sustainability. Am I still actually going to be able to have a business I can run in 5 years' time, all the way through to packaging, waste management? And what Angeline was saying earlier, it's something that's come through, is the customers demanding it. But I'm so flat out trying to work out how I'm going to pay payroll, I can't even get to anything sustainable. But one of the interesting things that we did tap into, and something we're going to explore further, is this sort of under 30-year-old doesn't see sustainability as an add-on or an obligation. It's just baked into how they do business. Excuse the pun, but it's where it's just the way they do business. And so there's some intergenerational issues across those 4 things as well. So this conversation, looking for key indicators, is something that was probably identified on every single person that we spoke to. They're hungry for metrics to understand how they can get some early warnings to what's happening in their business, to give them time to do something. That was an overwhelm. So this is going to be the start of, I think, many, many more conversations in this space. And the quality of the input from all of you has just been fantastic. And I thank you very, very much. I think this will be referred to, and we'll be knocking back on your doors in the not too distant future as we work our way through the program for the rest of the year. So thank you very much, Tony, and thank you, panel.
Thanks very much, all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone. Bye.